Throughout my lifespan, I have ridden about 173 different roller coasters, and I was able to put together a list of my all-time favorites of 2021, the ones that stand out to me the most, and make me want to come on for another ride. It was very hard for me to come up with this list, so the things I took into consideration while making this list is how much I desire a certain coaster. What coasters are the ones that I would rather come back and ride again? Using those metrics and criterias helped me come up with the ultimate list of my top 25 roller coasters I have ridden. Just a disclaimer, there are still a lot of parks with elite and legendary roller coasters that I have not been to yet. For example, I have not been to Carowinds or Dollywood, so Fury 325 and Lightning Rod are not going to be on this list. This list is only for coasters that I have personally ridden. Also, just as a side note, I have ridden Twisted Colossus when I visited Six Flags Magic Mountain. I just don't remember the ride experience one bit, so I don't think it would be fair for me to rank it on this video. For some weird reason, I do remember the experience of the other coasters I've ridden at Magic Mountain, so spoiler alert, a few of them will be on this list. If you have any questions of whether I've been to a certain park, or if you are wondering why a certain coaster did not come up on this list, feel free to ask me in the comments below. Remember, this list is only for the coasters I've ridden in 2021. For example, since I rode Shellraiser for the first time in 2022, it will not make this list, even though it is in my top 25. I'm also riding Iron Gwazi next week, but that's going to be in my top 25 list of 2022. But before we get started, here's an honorable mention. Superman the Ride at Six Flags New England. The thing that draws me to this coaster is the perfect layout. A big drop, out and back airtime hills, overbanks, more airtime hills, and finally, a complex spaghetti bowl section at the end. Here are the great things about this coaster. The drop is surprisingly forceful and really caught me off guard, delivering sustained flojecta airtime and a surprisingly strong stomach dropping feeling. The airtime hills also deliver some great sustained ejector airtime, and the spaghetti bowl section at the end pulls some insane positive G-forces. Here's my only problem with this ride, the restraints. These are the absolute worst roller coaster restraints I have ever come across, and they are totally stupid and pointless. Whenever there's an airtime moment, the big fat U-brick lap bar prevents any airtime that could have happened. It almost feels like the restraints are trying to spite you and don't want you to get any airtime. This makes me have to dread every single airtime hill that's about to come up. I honestly think I'm being very generous for putting this coaster as an honorable mention in my top 25 coasters I've ridden video, because of the restraints. The only reason it's an honorable mention is because of the good layout, good drop, and a great variety of forces. Now let's get into the actual top 25 part of the list. Number 25, Cheetah Hunt at Busch Gardens, Tampa. I don't remember too much about this coaster, but I will try to rank it as accurately as possible. I remember this ride pleasantly surprising me. The launches were super forceful. The hill that goes into the slow-paced figure 8 section of the ride actually delivers a very strong pop of ejector airtime if you're sitting in the front row. The drop off the figure 8 layout had some very strong flow to airtime, and it gave me a surprising stomach dropping feeling. The rest of the layout might seem very tame from looking at it, but after actually riding it, I can surely say those are all misconceptions. The one inversion is very whippy and actually pulls some surprising G-forces, and the S-bends at the end have some great whip to them and throw your body side to side. Last of all, the final airtime hill after the third launch has some of the best ejector airtime I have experienced on an Intamin coaster. This coaster often gets labeled as a family coaster, but I highly disagree with that label, and I believe the Cheetah Hunt is a truly underrated coaster that doesn't get enough credit. By the way, the problem of family coasters not getting enough credit is going to be a common theme on this list. Number 24, Storm Runner at Hershey Park. The launch on this coaster is used by a hydraulic system, which makes for a very forceful and memorable launch. Before the train launches, there is a spiel that says, "Now get ready, here we go." This spiel adds so much hype to the launch, and after the launch, it goes through a very forceful top hat with some great ejector airtime coming into the top of the spike. The rest of the coaster features some insane inversions with insane hang time, and the section at the end reminded me of Maverick with all those whippy side-to-side twists. Number 23, Full Throttle at Six Flags Magic Mountain. I only rode this once because of how crowded the park was that day, but for some reason, I do remember this one a lot more. This ride caught me by surprise as to how intense it was, and how much airtime it actually delivered. First of all, that launch out of the station is so much more forceful than I thought it would be. Second of all, the vertical loop had some of the best hang time I have ever experienced. And third of all, the backwards launch that occurs inside the tunnel is also super forceful. Last of all, the drop off the top hat was insane, and it dropped my stomach so much, almost to the point of El Toro. Many people complain about the lack of airtime on the top hat, and that the trim brakes at the bottom of the drop slow down the ride. I personally didn't notice a difference with the trim brakes, and although the top hat didn't have the strongest airtime, the rest of the elements made up for it. I think the Full Throttle is an underrated coaster, and should be a must-do for riders considering what to ride while visiting Six Flags Magic Mountain. Number 22. Boulder Dash at Lake Compounds. This CCI wooden roller coaster is actually at my home park, and I have truly gotten to appreciate the intense and magical experience this coaster provides. The section after the first drop does provide a lot of jackhammering, but if I'm sitting in the front row, I personally enjoy that jackhammering, and it makes the ride feel so much faster, more intense, and insane. This only applies if you're sitting in the front row, because if you're sitting in the back row, the jackhammering and roughness is actually painful and makes the ride worse. The reason Boulder Dash makes this list is because of the amazing front row ride it delivers. Here is how I'll put it. The back is unbearably rough, has weaker airtime, and is missing the fun factor of the wind. The front row has stronger airtime, has the type of bumpiness that makes this ride feel more insane, and has the fun factor of the wind. The front row ride on Boulder Dash is absolutely amazing. The bumpiness is perfect. Some of the small hills have some great ejector airtime, and the setting is absolutely beautiful. Riding in a deep forest with high winds, intense laterals, great airtime, and a perfect level of bumpiness is an absolutely amazing experience you can have on a wooden coaster. Do I think this is the world's best wooden coaster like the Golden Ticket Award says? No, I don't. In fact, there are a lot more wooden coasters on this list that I enjoy a lot more, but Boulder Dash is still a great ride in the front row, and that's why I made the number 22nd spot for my top 25 roller coasters I've ridden. Number 21. Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure at Universal's Islands of Adventure. This might be a bit of a surprise to some of you, because it's another family coaster, but again, a roller coaster does not have to be thrilling and have all those elements that coaster enthusiasts tend to obsess over, like airtime, hang time, intensity, etc., etc. I don't rank my favorite coasters based on how good each element is one by one. I rank it based on how much fun I have while riding, and how much I enjoy the ride experience. Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure. Oh crap, I'm out of breath. Why does this coaster need to have such a stupidly long name? Anyways, this coaster is an example of a ride experience that contains pure fun, not anything too thrilling. All 7 launches on this coaster were surprisingly forceful, and gave the ride such a jump start. The turns and movements added such a great fun factor, and my absolute favorite part is the drop track section. It pumps up all the riders so much, and adds so much more positive energy to the ride. Finally, the last launch at the end is so much fun, and ends the full packed ride experience with an amazing finale. This coaster is just proof that something does not need to be the most thrilling in order to be a fun ride experience. Number 20. Mystic Timbers at Kings Island. If I could use one word to describe this GCI wooden coaster, it would be fun. From its relentless high speeds to its insane laterals, this ride is pure fun. The drop off the lift hill actually wasn't anything too special for me, but the rest of the ride course definitely made up for it. Those hills and turns don't deliver any strong ejector airtime, but it was more of a mild mix of floater and ejector airtime. My all-time favorite part of this coaster was the trick track element. You literally go flying side to side and get some of the best laterals on a wooden coaster. The thing that shocked me most about this coaster is the smoothness. This ride has no minor rattle whatsoever. It is literally glossy smooth. There were parts during the ride where I could barely even feel the track. This was a huge surprise to me, especially considering that this is a real wooden coaster. This is by far the smoothest wooden coaster I have ever ridden. On my Kings Island ranking video, I did predict that this was going to make my top 10 list, but as much of a great coaster it is, it unfortunately doesn't make my top 10 list because of all the other great coasters I rode after visiting Kings Island. Coming at the number 19th spot is another wooden coaster. This time it is Mind Blower at Fun Spot Kissimmee. This is one of the only few wooden coasters that actually goes upside down. Before I go on about how great this coaster is, I will address how this coaster is quite shaky. Not as bad as El Toro or Boulder Dash in the back row, but it does shake you up a bit. Like I have said in other wooden coasters that have appeared on this list, the bumpiness on this coaster added to the ride experience, and made it feel more intense. What's so great about this coaster is the drop. If you're sitting in the back row, you literally get yanked over that drop. Following that drop is an insane corkscrew that pulls some insane positive G-forces. The rest of the ride course includes some surprisingly strong ejector airtime, and intense baked turns that feel like you are going to be flung out of the train. This ride is almost always a walk-on, and I have marathoned this thing twice now. Regardless of the roughness, I still think this is a very re-rideable coaster. Number 18. Phobia Fear Coaster at Lake Compounds. If any of you have seen my review on this coaster, make sure to check it out as I go more in depth about why I love this ride so much, more than other coaster enthusiasts. The first launch isn't that forceful, but the backwards launch into the spike of the non-inverting loop has some of the best mix of positive and lateral G-forces I have ever experienced on a roller coaster. The third launch through the station that goes up into the tallest spike of the ride is super intense, and you get an insane pop of ejector airtime at the top. The hang time on the 150-foot tall Heartline roll is insane and terrifying, and I failed to put my hands up out of fear every single time. Most of all, the twisted drop right after the Heartline roll is by far the strongest ejector airtime moment I have ever experienced on a roller coaster. I feel like this coaster often gets overshadowed by the fact that it's a clone, but for some reason, I don't know why this thing gets so underrated from a coaster enthusiast standpoint. To this day, this is my most ridden roller coaster because of the lack of crowds at lake compounds, and I have surely gotten to appreciate the sheer insanity of this thing. Number 17. Flight of Fear at Kings Island and Kings Dominion. Like Phobia Fear Coaster, I think this thing is truly underrated. I am someone who loves indoor coasters, and this one is no exception. That launch has such a great surprise factor, and it's actually surprisingly forceful. Those inversions, twists, and turns have some insane positive and linear G-forces. And finally, the final section at the end with those tight turns and the final corkscrew before the brake run caught me by surprise. That corkscrew is so intense that I almost grayed out from it. The lights and the suspenseful music add a whole new energy to this coaster that otherwise would have not been experienced without it. This ride can get a bit jerky, but again, the jerkiness actually made the ride a lot more fun. I don't know why this coaster doesn't get as much love as it deserves. And coming at the number 16th spot is yet another Premier Rides coaster. It is Revenge of the Mummy at Universal Studios Florida. When I rode this coaster when I was 6 years old, I immediately fell in love with it, and ended up doing it about 6 times. It's not as much the coaster layout itself that's so great about this ride, even though the coaster layout is also fantastic, don't get me wrong, but the story and theming adds such a different energy to this ride that cannot be matched by anything else. Firstly, it starts with an animatronic saying, "Seriously, the curse is real, this whole place is a trap," which starts the ride with such an ominous tone. Secondly, the first launch up the incline was surprisingly forceful, and the twisted drop following that launch gives a surprising dose of lateral airtime. The twists and turns are surprisingly intense, and the music, darkness, and fire effects make this ride feel so much more thrilling than it actually is. Finally, the ride has the best twist ever, with a spiel saying, "We hope you enjoyed your ride," and then the fire effects appear, and before you know it, you're launched into the dark once again. I feel like this is another case of a coaster being underappreciated because the layout isn't considered very thrilling, and I really don't get that logic. Number 15. Sky Rush at Hershey Park. As of right now, I don't really remember this ride experience that well, so I'm going to replay what I said about Sky Rush about 4 years ago, in my Hershey Park coaster ranking video. Just a warning, my voice was a lot different and more annoying back then, and on top of that, I wasn't even using a script like I am now, so you will hear me repeating myself over and over again, and a lot of rambling. Anyways, let's take a listen.
Of course, it's Sky Rush, probably no surprise. What an insane roller coaster. Like, that drop actually is not as great as people say it is. That drop is okay. I got okay airtime, and I got no stomach feeling, even though I sat in the back, because those feelings are usually in the back. When I get with my stomach. The drop was a little underwhelming, but the ride is insane. It is so intense. You get crazy ejector airtime throughout the ride. Now, there's something else I have to talk about, is the restraints. Like, some people say it's super painful. I only found it to really be painful on that last airtime hill. Because throughout the ride, yes, like, you still got airtime, okay? It's not like Superman the Ride, where those restraints are big, they hurt even more, and you don't get any airtime. Here, they feel tight, and they could be pressuring and a tiny bit uncomfortable throughout the whole ride. But you still get really good ejector. You get airtime, alright? It's only with that last airtime hill you try to get airtime. But you really don't. It's only that last hill near Comet where it's actually painful. And I have not experienced a wing seat because I heard that was bad. So maybe the wing seats are even worse, so I didn't even bother doing that. But this is probably one of the best roller coasters I've ever ridden in my life. It is intense, it has insane ejector airtime, and I just put aside that last airtime hill, man. Look, you want to experience a fast-paced, intense ejector airtime coaster. But there is one painful thing in the end. Like, who cares? I don't really mind that last painful hill. And those restraints are actually good. They're very small. They give you a lot of really good room.
Just to summarize it, I hope you didn't lose your sanity hearing me say the same thing about Sky Rush over and over again. Anyways, for the sake of your time and sanity, let's move on with the countdown. Number 14, the Incredible Hall Coaster at Islands of Adventure. I usually don't like B&M loopers that much. They tend to have a painful amount of headbanging, and there also tends to be an annoying rattle that often occurs on all B&M loopers. But this ride is the one exception. First of all, there was no rattle at all. It was the smoothest B&M coaster I've ridden, maybe because of the track replacement that this coaster received. I don't know. But the surprising smoothness is only a little bit of what makes this coaster so great. The launch is so intense, and the build up to the launch is also insane. There are all these special lighting effects to hype you up for the launch, and then boom, you're off, and your head is pinned against the seat. I'm normally not crazy about inversions, but these inversions are some of the best I've experienced. The coaster takes on each element with speed and whip, and the pacing through every element is perfect. Not to mention that the onboard audio syncs with the movements of the layout perfectly, and makes the ride experience so much more epic. I also grayed out at the bottom of the Cobra roll. In summary, this coaster is an insane speed and whip machine that gives you no chance to catch your breath. I didn't think this would be as great as people were saying about it coming into it, because everyone was saying how great Kumba was, and I ended up finding it very underwhelming. But this thing is no joke, and I can say for certain that it's not overrated at all. Coming at the number 13th spot is the first RMC coaster on this list. It is Twisted Timbers at King's Dominion. I'm going to admit, there are RMCs that I liked a lot more than this, but this was still a pleasant surprise. The barrel roll drop actually dropped my stomach a little bit, and the airtime is just non-stop. Like I said in my King's Dominion ranking video, it's just ejector air after ejector air. The rest of the elements I feel like are a break in between the airtime madness, and the inversions don't seem like anything special. But this coaster isn't about the inversions, it's about the repetitive airtime moments. This is a fantastic RMC, but it's still not my favorite compared to some of the other fantastic experiences. Number 12, Mako at SeaWorld Orlando. When the ride first opened, everyone said it was the best B&M hyper ever built. Eventually, other enthusiasts began saying it was overrated because of how much hype was centered around it. I can say, at least for me, that this is the best B&M hyper I've ridden. The layout on paper isn't anything special compared to other B&M hypers. Nitro's layout itself is even stronger than this one, but the elements on Nitro aren't as strong. Mako takes on each element at hyper strength for a B&M hyper. The first drop is the best drop I've experienced on a hypercoaster, delivering sustained ejector airtime and an intense stomach punch. After the drop comes some camelback hills with sustained 5-second floater airtime hills. My absolute favorite part of the ride is a speed hill right before the brake run. This speed hill delivers a surprising and sudden burst of thigh-crushing ejector airtime. Not the bad type of thigh crush, but a good type of thigh crush, especially since we're talking about the B&M clamshell restraints. Overall, if you are visiting Orlando, this is a must-do for coaster enthusiasts who have limited time here and are visiting the area. Number 11, X2 at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Like Full Throttle, this was one of the two coasters from this list for Magic Mountain, and the same two that I remembered best out of all the other ones I've ridden there. If I could use one word to describe this coaster, it would be disorienting. From the gut-punching and cheek-crushing intense first drop, to the random and unexpected flips, along with these intense turns and inversions, this coaster is the second most intense coaster I've ridden in my life. This ride experience was so disorienting that I felt like I was floating in some kind of random dimension, and it was hard for my brain to process that I was actually riding X2. I don't know when the next time I'm going to California would be, but I cannot wait to re-ride this coaster if I ever end up revisiting Six Flags Magic Mountain. Number 10, King the Ka at Six Flags Great Adventure. This ride gets a lot of hate because everyone just compares it to Top Thrill Dragster, for some goshly reason. The fact that Top Thrill Dragster's launch is a tiny bit smoother, and the trains have lap bars, automatically discredits how good King the Ka is, if you're thinking about it from a coaster enthusiast perspective. But surprisingly enough, I prefer Ka over Dragster, and speaking of which, Dragster didn't even make this list because I was very disappointed by it. Fight me. Yes, I do think King the Ka is better. The launch is so intense. Every time the train accelerates, it feels like someone is forcefully pinning your head against the seat. The intensity of this launch, combined with the insane winds and bumpy ride, makes for an unforgettable launch. And yes, the roughness on the launch actually adds to the ride experience for me. It makes it feel so much more insane. Regardless of how long the wait is for the front row, wait as long as you need to. Trust me, it is so worth it. The launch feels so much more intense in the front. The wind adds an insanity factor, and there is a bonus pop of ejector airtime as the train reaches the top of the spike. Number 9, El Toro at Six Flags Great Adventure. In my Great Adventure coaster ranking video, I did put this at number 3, below King the Ka, because I hated how rough this coaster is. But now I'm putting it above King the Ka after re-evaluating a bunch, because the rest of the elements really make up for the roughness. The drop is my favorite roller coaster drop to this day. The camelback hills are my favorite airtime moments to this day. Not as strong as the airtime moments on Phobia Fear Coaster, but it's still my favorite. Those elements alone make this a number 9 coaster in my rankings list. I really need to re-ride this thing when it opens again for the 2022 season to get a new perspective. Coming at the number 8th spot is another coaster at Six Flags Great Adventure. It is a Jersey Devil coaster. This might be a controversial pick to some of you, since a lot of coaster enthusiasts say this is the weakest RMC coaster. A lot of people say the pacing is garbage, and the elements do not deliver very strongly. While I do agree with the fact that the pacing isn't the best, depending on what time of day you ride, I don't think the pacing is as terrible as others make it out to be. The experience you get highly differs based on where you sit. For me, the only two seats that actually justify this coaster to make the number 8th spot are the front and back seat. The rest of those seats result in a mediocre ride. If you're sitting in the back row, you literally get flung over that drop, which results in amazing ejector airtime and an insane stomach dropping feeling. The rest of the coaster in the back row later in the day actually feels very fast paced, and the hills and inversions have some strong airtime and hang time. Some of the bank turns throughout the layout surprisingly pull some intense G-forces, and I love the general feeling of being whipped around up and down and side to side. This might seem like the weakest RMC, but it's really worth it in my book. Number 7. Railblazer at California's Great America. This is like Jersey Devil Coaster on steroids. The drop is strong like Jersey Devil Coaster, except 2 times more. The whippiness is increased by 10 times as strong, and the airtime moments literally burst you out of your seat and destroy the circulation in your thighs. Being whipped around while being thrown out of your seat violently is absolutely amazing, and is the reason why this makes the number 7th spot. It's great that RMC was able to get it right on the prototype Raptor model, because this really set the tone for how the future of this coaster model could play out. Number 6. Wicked Cyclone at Six Flags New England. I've always thought of this thing as a miniature Steel Vengeance, and the layout definitely says why. This is definitely one of the best coaster layouts ever. The drop is so strong, even stronger than Jersey Devil. It drops your stomach so much, and the turns and inversions were actually whippy and forceful, unlike some other RMCs. The mini overbank hill is the second strongest airtime moment I've experienced, and the rest of the ride is full of positive Gs, body whips, and strong hang time. The fact that this coaster dies down at the end actually makes it better in my opinion, because the slower the train rolls through the inversion, the more hang time is felt for a longer amount of time. You will need to experience this in person to conclude how insane this thing is. And don't let the smaller scale size of this RMC fool you. As of right now, this is currently my second favorite RMC behind you know what. The next pick at number 5 is probably going to be the most surprising pick on this list, but it is Space Mountain at the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World. The reason this might come as a surprise to the small number of viewers I have is 1, it's a Disney coaster, so not a lot of coaster enthusiasts think about it by default, and 2, it's another family coaster. Regardless of how slow this coaster is, only at 26 miles per hour, it doesn't even feel like a family coaster. There are some elements that are very thrilling, including those 2 very strong surprise pops of ejector airtime. Riding through total darkness with star projections and visual effects all around you, while getting whipped side to side, and riding a track with the perfect amount of bumpiness makes for such a fun experience. Just like Hagrid's and Mystic Timbers, the one word I would use to describe this coaster is fun. The jankiness is what makes this coaster what it is, and makes it so charming for me. I am known to have a concerning obsession with this ride, mainly because of its intense and thrilling layout, combined with the special effects, but I still don't understand why this is so underrated even within the visitors of the Walt Disney World Resort. Almost everyone prefers Expedition Everest to this, which doesn't have as strong of special effects, has a boring helix, and a lackluster drop, compared to Space Mountain, which has 2 amazing drops, 2 amazing airtime pops, jankiness that puts a smile on my face, and the best special effects I've ever seen on any roller coaster yet. Number 4 is Velocicoaster at Islands of Adventure. I do not know a single person, GP or enthusiast, that has come off this thing saying they didn't like it or it was just alright. There are people that would come off this ride saying they loved it and it's their favorite coaster in the world, and then there are also people like me who don't think it is the best in the world, but it is still an ultra elite roller coaster. This ride is super thrilling and has every single element and coaster aspect that a coaster should have, and that enthusiasts love, but the theming, excitement, and energy around this coaster also makes it a ride that I think about and hype up a lot in my head, even compared to some of the other coasters that are higher on this list than this. The visual strobes and sound effects right before the first launch add such a large excitement factor. You wait for the whoosh sound to go boom, and then you're off. When I rode this for the first time in the back row, my expectations going into it were unbelievably high. During the first half of the ride, I felt there to be a lack of intensity and there were some spots where I expected there to be airtime and there wasn't. And I thought to myself, what's everybody talking about? But then after the second launch, I was even more impressed. The 2 elements that stood out to me the most was the drop of the top hat in the back row and the Mosasaurus roll at the end, but I still came off thinking it was really good, but not as good as others were saying it was. But after riding it again this time in the front row, I was even more blown away. The front was so much more intense. There were spots where there was airtime and I wasn't expecting it, and the Mosasaurus roll became my favorite element on any roller coaster. Trust me, it is absolutely legendary. After my front row ride, I went in the back, and felt the exact same way about my front row ride, maybe even better. I don't know what it was, but a disappointment on my first ride was just a fluke. In summary, this coaster has everything a thrill coaster should have. An intense launch, a variety of airtime moments, positive G-forces, and insane whip and hang time on the Mosasaurus roll. I can't wait to ride this again when I visit Universal again in the next few months. The number 3 spot is also one of the biggest controversial surprises out of the many on this list. It is Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point. Before all of you click out of this video, let me explain myself. The reason this coaster made the number 3 spot on this list is solely because of the airtime. Just like Twisted Timbers, this coaster just has ejector airtime after ejector airtime times 10. And besides the mid-course, there is absolutely no time to catch your breath from all the thigh-crushing negative G-forces. The only thing I feel like this ride specializes in is airtime. Everything else was just alright. The drop wasn't as good as people were saying it was, and I found there to be a lack of intense positive G-forces. The inversions were also a bit disappointing, and it just felt like the coaster went by each inversion way too quickly, which made it hard for me to even feel them. I got better hang time on the final 0G roll on Wicked Cyclone than I did on any inversion on Steel Vengeance. Also, I felt like the drop was a lot stronger on Wicked Cyclone than Steel Vengeance, delivering stronger airtime and a stronger stomach dropping feeling. After my first ride, I was a bit disappointed, and I went to ride again to see if it was just a fluke, mainly because my expectations were so high going into it. But it wasn't. Don't get me wrong, I still love this coaster, and I can't wait to re-ride it if I ever visit Cedar Point next summer. The Camelback and Outer Bank airtime hills are some of my favorite elements, and the rest of the layout's repetitive airtime going in many different directions is very unique for any roller coaster. I do find this a bit overrated, but the fact that it makes a number 3 spot says that the good elements on this coaster are really good. Number 2, Intimidator 305 at King's Dominion. As someone who loves intense roller coasters, this one was sure a treat for me. When I first rode this in the back row, I thought it was a number 4 worthy coaster, but after riding it in the front row, I was blown away even more. The turn at the bottom of the drop is so legendary, and it made me gray out every single time. It didn't make me black out like others say it does, but it has a minor gray out. The giant floater hill doesn't deliver floater airtime, it delivers flagector airtime in the back, and in the front row, it delivers a sudden and violent burst of ejector airtime. The rest of the ride feels so good. It's so fast paced, it goes so fast while whipping you around side to side, and it actually feels like you're driving in a super fast race car. Also, if you're sitting in the front row, the wind amplifies the insanity by 11. By the way, those side-to-side turns are so well done and are currently my second favorite element on any roller coaster, behind the Mosasaurus roll. The only time you can really catch your breath is right after the airtimeless airtime hill, and until the ride hits the brakes. When I say this ride is intense, I don't necessarily mean that the G-forces pin your head against the seat the entire ride. The combination of elements and the speed the coaster takes at each element is what gives this coaster the intense reputation that it deserves. And it is beyond words to describe how great the feeling of being on this coaster really is. But there is still one more coaster that I rank above this. Number 1, Maverick at Cedar Point. After riding Steel Vengeance for the first time, I was ready to ride Maverick. I was excited, but I had lower expectations for this than I did for Steel Vengeance. But oh my gosh, did this blow me away. At the time I got off, it was by far my number 1 coaster at the time. No question about it. If someone asked me what my favorite element on this coaster is, I would say every single one of them. Except for maybe the LSM lift hill, which is still really good. The first drop absolutely blew me away. It literally yanks you out of your seat, and your stomach literally goes up into your throat, and it is such an amazing feeling. Those I-305 style turns whip you side to side, which is one of my favorite aspects of any roller coaster, getting thrown side to side. The 2 ejector airtime hills are so strong, even stronger than any on Steel Vengeance, and the launch is so forceful, even more than Top Thrill dragsters. The turn over the water pulls some bone-crushing positive G-forces, and the Stangle dives completely caught me off guard by how strong they were, and how forcefully they whip you to the side. After riding it, I was absolutely speechless, and couldn't even process how insane of an experience I just went through. I was shocked to find out that I liked this more than Steel Vengeance, and that it was my new number 1 coaster at the time. As of right now, Maverick still holds up as the best coaster I've ever ridden, and I don't know what coaster will overtake it as the number 1 in my rankings. This and I-305 were so close, but after thinking about it, I felt like I enjoyed Maverick a lot more, mainly due to its stronger variety of elements and my liking of fast-paced, whippy, and intense coasters.